The night on Zareth Prime was colder than usual. Neon lights flickered over broken streets, and the air was filled with the smell of oil, metal, and rain. Shadows moved between the tall buildings, where rich humans walked in silence, ignoring the poor who sat on the ground. In the corner of an old market alley, a thin alien mother named Riala held her baby close. Her skin was pale blue and her eyes large and silver, glowing softly in the dark. Her small child was wrapped in a torn blanket, his breathing weak and slow. Riala could feel his heartbeat against her chest, and it made her heart hurt with fear. She opened her small bag and poured her coins into her trembling hand. The glowing chips were few, old, scratched, and almost worthless. She counted them again and again, hoping she had made a mistake. "Maybe it's enough," she whispered to herself, her voice shaking. The store in front of her was run by a robot merchant, its body covered in rust and dust. The sign above it blinked with a dull red light. Food and supplies. Human credit only. Riala walked inside, her steps slow and careful, her baby starting to cry softly. The robot's single red eye scanned her as she approached the counter. "Baby formula," she said in a small voice, holding out her coins. The robot paused, then made a mechanical sound that almost sounded like laughter. "These are not accepted currency," it said coldly. Riala's heart sank. "Please. It's all I have," she begged. The robot's voice stayed flat. "Human credits only, no exceptions." Her baby whimpered again, and Riala held him tighter. The people in the shop looked at her with disgust. Some humans whispered to each other, some turned away. To them, she was just another alien beggar, not worth a second look. Riala stepped out of the store, the cold rain starting to fall harder. Drops landed on her thin skin, running down her face like tears. She sat under a metal awning, staring at her useless coins. Her baby's cries grew weaker, each sound a knife in her heart. She thought of her home world, once full of green skies and gentle rivers, but war had destroyed everything. Humans came with ships, bringing laws, control, and walls. She escaped with nothing but her child, believing she could find safety here. Now she knew she was wrong. For a long time, she sat there, rocking her baby, whispering soft words in her alien tongue. Her voice trembled but carried warmth. She tried to hide her fear from the child who didn't understand. The rain made her clothes heavy, and her fingers were numb from the cold. Then, a shadow stopped in front of her. She looked up and saw a tall man, a human, wearing a dark coat and carrying a travel bag. His face was tired but kind, and his eyes looked at her, not through her. For the first time in months, someone actually saw her. The man, Evan, hesitated for a moment, watching her silently. He noticed the small bundle in her arms and the empty baby bottle beside her. He could tell she hadn't eaten in days. Without speaking, he took a small packet from his bag, a thermal blanket, and placed it beside her. "You'll freeze out here," he said softly. Riala stared at him, unsure if this was real. No human had spoken to her with kindness since she arrived on this planet. She wanted to say thank you, but her voice broke before she could speak. Evan crouched down, meeting her eyes. "What happened?" he asked gently. Riala looked down at her baby, then showed him the old coins in her hand. "I tried to buy food for my baby, but they said no," she whispered. Her eyes filled with tears, and one rolled down her cheek. Evan looked at the coins, then at the store, his jaw tightening. He stood up slowly, the rain sliding off his shoulders. "Stay here," he said firmly. She didn't understand what he meant, but before she could ask, he walked straight into the store. The robot greeted him with the same cold tone. Evan placed his hand on the scanner and said, "1 unit of baby formula, now." The robot's red eye scanned him again. "Human credit confirmed, transaction approved." A moment later, Evan stepped out and handed the warm bottle to Riala. Her hands shook as she took it. Her baby drank slowly, eyes closing as comfort returned to his small face. Riala's tears mixed with the rain, but this time they were tears of relief. She looked up at the human man again, wanting to thank him, but her voice failed her. He only smiled faintly and said, "Take care of him." Neither of them noticed the security drones floating above, recording everything silently, their red lights blinking in the dark. The kindness of one human was now seen as a crime by the system that ruled them all. And in that cold street, under the rain and neon lights, a small act of compassion had just changed 2 lives forever. Rain fell harder across the neon streets of Zareth Prime. The storm covered the city in silver light, and every droplet sounded like a whisper of forgotten souls. Most people hurried past, their faces hidden behind masks and holographic screens. No one cared for the crying alien mother sitting in the dark, except one human who couldn't just walk away. Evan stood beside the alley, watching Riala feed her baby with trembling hands. The bottle he had bought for her was small, but it meant life. Her baby drank slowly, his tiny chest rising and falling in weak rhythm. Evan felt something twist inside him, a deep, old ache he thought he had buried long ago. He remembered his own sister back on Earth, holding her child, smiling despite hunger and war. That memory made him stay. Riala looked up shyly, afraid to speak. Her glowing silver eyes reflected the lights of passing vehicles. "You shouldn't have helped me," she whispered, her voice weak and tired. Evan frowned. "Why not?" he asked. "Because it's against the law," she said, looking down. "Humans are not allowed to help aliens." Evan's expression darkened. He had heard of the rule, the segregation code. It was made to keep humans and aliens apart after the Great Interplanetary War, but now it was just an excuse for cruelty. He looked at her again, holding her sick baby close, and felt anger rise in his chest. "Then the law is wrong," he said simply. Riala stared at him, not believing what she heard. Every human she had met before treated her like dust. But this man was different. He looked at her not with fear or hate, but with compassion. And that scared her even more, because in this city, kindness was dangerous. Evan sat beside her under the awning, ignoring the rain that soaked his coat. He handed her a small packet of nutrient bars from his bag. "Eat," he said quietly. "You need strength." She shook her head. "It's for him," she said, glancing at her baby. Evan gave a tired smile. "I already bought the baby formula, so this is for you." For a few seconds she hesitated, then she opened the packet and took a small bite. Her eyes closed, tears falling as she chewed slowly. It was probably the first real food she had eaten in days. Evan looked around. The market was closing, but several people still stood nearby. Some humans stared at him with disgust, whispering to each other. A tall man in a silver uniform tapped his communicator, watching from across the street. Evan didn't notice him, but the city had already noticed him. "You risk too much," Riala whispered again. Evan looked at her baby's tiny hand, gripping her finger. He sighed. "Sometimes risk is the only thing that makes us human." She didn't understand fully, but his words felt powerful. There was something noble in the way he spoke, calm, steady, honest. A moment later, the sound of mechanical wings echoed overhead. Security drones hovered slowly through the street, red lights sweeping the ground. Riala's eyes widened in fear. Evan noticed and gently pulled his hood lower. He stood up. "Come on," he said, "we can't stay here." She shook her head quickly. "No, if they see you with me." "They already did," he interrupted, his tone quiet but firm. Riala clutched her child tightly. The drones moved closer, scanning the area. Evan led her toward a small side street filled with trash and flickering lights. His boots splashed through puddles, and her bare feet left faint blue marks on the wet floor. They reached an old metal gate that led to a power tunnel. Evan forced it open with a grunt and motioned for her to go inside. The air smelled of rust and electricity, but at least it was dry. He looked back once and for a brief moment saw two enforcers in gray armor watching from afar. Their helmets glowed with the insignia of the colonial authority. He knew then. He had crossed a line he could never return from. Inside the tunnel, the dim lights flickered on. Riala sat down, wrapping her baby again. Evan stood near the entrance, checking his wristband for signals. No alarm yet, but it was only a matter of time. She spoke softly. "Why did you help me, human?" He turned, meeting her eyes. "Because no one helped me when I needed it." The silence that followed was heavy, but peaceful. For the first time, Riala felt safe, and that feeling scared her more than the cold. Outside, thunder rolled through the sky. The drones circled the empty alley, scanning for signs of movement. A voice echoed from one of them. "Attention, Citizen Evan Kerr. You are under investigation for violation of the segregation code." Evan froze, his heart beating fast. He looked at Riala and whispered, "Don't panic," but she could already hear the metallic footsteps approaching. She knew what happened to those who broke human laws. Evan clenched his fists, his eyes sharp with defiance. He turned off the light inside the tunnel and whispered, "Stay quiet, no matter what happens." Outside, the city sirens began to wail in the distance. The hunt had already begun, and the man who once walked alone was now standing between a cruel system and a mother's hope. The sirens of Zareth Prime screamed through the city. Their echo bounced off the tall metallic towers, filling the night with fear. Every light in the market flickered red, a warning that someone had broken the sacred rules. And high above, security drones searched like hungry vultures. Down below, two shadows hid in a narrow tunnel beneath the city. Evan and Riala. Riala's baby slept quietly in her arms, unaware of the danger outside, but her heart raced with panic. Evan crouched near the entrance, checking the small wrist device glowing on his arm. "They're scanning the area," he said softly. Riala's voice trembled. "They know you helped me." Evan nodded. "Yeah, they do." For a moment, silence filled the space. Only the distant hum of power lines and the faint breathing of the baby could be heard. Riala's eyes were wide with guilt. "You should have left me there," she whispered. Evan looked at her sharply. "And let your child starve?" "No." His tone was firm but calm. He had seen too much injustice in his life to ignore one more cruel law. Riala shook her head slowly. "You don't understand. Humans who help aliens disappear." Her words were heavy. "They call it justice, but it's a silent punishment. No one ever sees them again." Evan leaned back against the wall, sighing. He had heard rumors but never believed them. Now, looking at her pale face and frightened eyes, he knew the rumors were true. Above them, metallic footsteps echoed down the street. Enforcers in gray armor were scanning every corner. Their helmets flashed red as they received updates. "Subject identified as Evan Kerr, human male, former engineer, currently at large," the robotic voice announced. Evan's stomach tightened. They knew exactly who he was. He motioned to Riala to stay quiet. The baby stirred and made a small noise. Evan gently took off his jacket and covered them both. The light footsteps moved closer. Riala held her breath, praying to stars that no longer listened. After a few tense minutes, the sounds faded away. Evan exhaled slowly. "They're gone. For now." Riala looked at him in disbelief. "Why do you do this? You owe me nothing." Evan's voice softened. "Maybe not. But kindness doesn't need a reason." She lowered her gaze, confused by his courage. In her world, kindness always came with a price. He checked his device again. It flickered with warning lights. "The city grid knows my ID. They'll lock my credit, cancel my access, and track my movement," he said quietly. He thought for a moment, then added, "We need to get off this planet." Riala blinked. "Off the planet? That's impossible for me. I don't even have citizenship." Evan smiled faintly. "Then we'll find a way. Rules are made by people, and people can be wrong." Just then, a mechanical voice echoed through the tunnel. "Unauthorized life signatures detected. Surrender immediately." Evan's eyes widened. "They found us." The tunnel lights turned red as drones entered from both sides. Riala stood frozen in terror, clutching her child. Evan pushed her behind an old pipe and drew a small plasma tool from his bag. It wasn't a weapon, but it would have to do. The first drone appeared, its scanners glowing blue. "Citizen Evan Kerr," it said coldly. "You are under arrest for violation of the Segregation Code, Section 9. Human-aliens interaction." Evan lifted the tool. "I didn't break a law. I followed my conscience." The drone's response was emotionless. "Conscience is not recognized by law." Evan fired the tool, hitting the drone's sensor and sending sparks across the wall. The others activated instantly, their lights flashing. Riala screamed softly as one fired a stun blast that hit near her feet. Evan grabbed her arm. "Run!" They dashed through the tunnel, their shadows stretching under the flashing red lights. The ground shook as explosions echoed behind them. Riala held her baby tightly, tears streaming down her face. Evan guided her through the maze-like corridors, every turn a gamble. Finally, they reached a broken vent that led into the lower part of the city, the underlevels. He forced it open, and they climbed through, dropping into darkness. They landed in a place that smelled of dust and old metal. Broken signs glowed faintly with words from another time. Here, the city's forgotten people lived, both human and alien. Evan looked around. "They won't follow us down here. Too dangerous." Riala looked at him, breathing hard. "You just became a criminal because of me." He smiled tiredly. "Maybe. But if the law makes compassion a crime, then I'm fine being guilty." For a long time, they sat in silence, listening to the hum of the underground. Riala's baby slept peacefully again, unaware that his mother and the strange human beside her had just started something far greater than themselves. Above them, the Colonial Authority issued an alert across every screen. "Warning, human male Evan Kerr has violated the segregation code. Report any contact immediately." And somewhere deep within the city's system, a new file opened. Subject of interest, the human who helped an alien. The sky over Zareth Prime cracked open with thunder. Rain poured down like melted glass, glowing under the city's blue and red lights. Every drop carried the reflection of a world built on steel and lies. And somewhere deep below, two fugitives ran for their lives, a human and an alien mother. Evan and Riala pushed through the darkness of the lower tunnels. The sound of dripping water and distant machinery surrounded them. Riala's arms ached as she held her baby close, wrapping him in the last dry cloth she had. Evan's clothes were torn, his hands cut from climbing through vents and pipes, but he didn't slow down. Not for a second. Behind them, metallic footsteps echoed. The enforcers had followed. Their lights flashed through the cracks in the ceiling, searching every corner. "Evan Kerr, surrender," a cold voice shouted through the tunnel. Evan ignored it, his breath harsh, his mind racing. He looked back at Riala and whispered, "Keep moving. Don't look back." They reached a broken service door and forced it open. A rush of cold wind hit them, carrying the smell of smoke and rain. They were outside again, but not free. Above, the city glowed like a giant machine breathing in chaos. Flying drones hovered through the sky, scanning for heat and movement. Riala shivered. "They will find us," she said. Evan nodded. "Maybe, but not tonight." He guided her into the shadows of the narrow alleys. The rain washed the dirt from their faces, mixing with tears they didn't notice. The baby whimpered softly, and Riala hummed a quiet tune to calm him. Her voice was low and sad, almost lost beneath the storm. They passed walls covered with propaganda screens flashing in bright colors. Human first, alien second, obey the code. Evan stared at the words with disgust. Every screen showed his picture now. Wanted, Evan Kerr. Crime, treason against humanity. His face looked cold. On the screen, but the real man standing in the rain was full of warmth and rage. Riala looked at him with guilt. "You could go. Leave me. They'll stop hunting you if I'm gone." Evan shook his head firmly. "No, they'll never stop. Once you help someone, you can't unsee the truth." A sudden flash of light filled the alley. A drone had spotted them. Evan pulled Riala behind a large metal container as laser sights cut through the rain. "Stay low," he whispered, pulling out a small EMP device from his pocket. It was an old tool from his engineering days, one he had kept for emergencies. He pressed the button. A sharp buzz filled the air, and the drone's lights flickered out. It fell to the ground, silent and smoking. But the explosion of sparks had given away their location. Voices shouted from the rooftops, and the sound of jet boots roared closer. "Go!" Evan yelled, grabbing Riala's hand and pulling her into the next street. They ran past markets, broken vehicles, and neon signs that flickered in the storm. Every turn felt endless, every breath heavier than the last. Then, in the distance, they saw a narrow bridge leading toward the industrial zone. If they could cross it, they might reach the old shipping docks. And maybe a way off-world. But as they ran, a laser shot hit the ground beside them. Evan turned, eyes wide, as two enforcers dropped from the sky, their armor glowing. The leader stepped forward, his voice mechanical and cruel. "You should have stayed obedient, human." Evan moved between the enforcer and Riala. "She's done nothing wrong," he shouted. The enforcer raised his blaster. "Compassion is not an excuse. You broke the code." Riala's heart pounded as she held her baby tighter. Evan glanced around. His mind raced for options. Then he spotted a broken pipe above them, steam leaking out in bursts. He looked at her quickly. "When I say run, you run and don't stop." She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "You'll die." He smiled softly. "Maybe, but you'll live." The enforcers stepped closer, their weapons ready. Evan slammed his hand against a nearby power panel. The pipe burst open, filling the alley with blinding steam and light. He grabbed Riala's shoulder and shouted, "Now!" She ran, her feet splashing through puddles, clutching her child. Behind her, she heard shouts, gunfire, and the sound of metal crashing. She turned once. Evan was gone in the fog, swallowed by the storm. Riala kept running, tears mixing with the rain. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of the industrial docks. There, she hid under a damaged ship frame, gasping for air. Her baby was safe, but her heart broke with fear and hope mixed together. She looked back toward the city where lights flashed red in the sky. She whispered his name softly, "Evan." Somewhere in the storm, a figure limped through the smoke. Blood on his arm, eyes burning with determination. Evan wasn't dead. Not yet. He looked up at the sky filled with lightning and said quietly, "If the system calls kindness a crime, then I'll keep breaking their laws." The storm had passed, but the city of Zareth Prime still burned in the distance. Red lights flashed across the skyline like angry veins, searching for the two fugitives who had dared to defy the law. Down in the abandoned docks, beneath a broken cargo ship, Riala sat holding her baby. Her clothes were soaked, her hands trembling, but her child slept soundly against her chest. She looked up at the night sky through a hole in the metal roof. The stars shimmered faintly behind the pollution sea. Louds, they were distant and cold, but to her, they were the only sign of freedom left. For hours, she sat in silence, afraid to move. Every sound, every footstep, every drip of water, made her heart jump. She kept thinking of Evan, the strange human who had risked everything for her. Was he alive? Or had the enforcers taken him away like so many others? Her chest tightened at the thought. She whispered a small prayer in her native tongue, a wish for him to still be breathing somewhere in the darkness. Then she heard movement behind her. A shadow stepped through the mist, limping slightly. She gasped and clutched her baby tighter, until she saw the familiar face. It was Evan, bruised, bleeding, but alive. He dropped down beside her with a tired smile. "Told you I don't die that easily." Riala's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, she smiled. "You came back," she said softly. He nodded. "I said I would." Evan tore a piece of his sleeve and wrapped it around a cut on his arm. The wound glowed faintly blue from the plasma burn. Riala helped him without speaking. Their hands brushed, and for a moment there was a strange quiet between them, the kind that didn't need words, only shared understanding. They sat together under the broken hull of the ship. The rain had stopped, and the air was cool. "Why did you come back for me?" she asked quietly. Evan looked up at the stars through the roof and said, "Because I promised myself once that if I ever saw someone in need, I wouldn't walk away again." Riala tilted her head. "You lost someone?" He nodded slowly. "My sister, during the food riots on Earth. Nobody helped her. I was too far to reach her." His voice cracked, but he forced a smile. "Helping you. It feels like I'm keeping that promise alive." Riala's eyes softened. "Then I will make a promise too," she said. "If we ever find a place where no one has to hide, I'll raise my child to remember you, the human who helped us." Evan looked at her surprised and then chuckled quietly. "That's a big promise." She smiled faintly. "It's a big galaxy." The baby stirred and made a small sound. Evan reached into his bag and pulled out a small metal flask. He poured a bit of warm nutrient water into the bottle and handed it to her. As she fed the baby, he looked around the docks, studying the old ships. Most were broken, rusted, or stripped for parts, but one, an old cargo shuttle, still had some power lights flickering. "Maybe that one still works," he said, pointing toward it. Riala followed his gaze. "Can you fix it?" Evan smiled faintly. "I was an engineer before all this. I can fix anything, if we have time." For the next few hours they worked quietly together. Riala held a small light while Evan repaired the circuits and fuel lines. The sound of his tools echoed softly through the empty hangar. At times, he winced from pain but kept going. Riala watched him, this human who refused to give up, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. When the shuttle's engines finally hummed, a soft blue glow filled the dock. Evan wiped his hands and grinned. "It's alive." Riala's eyes lit up. "We can leave this planet?" "Maybe not tonight," he said. "They'll still be looking for us, but soon." He looked at her seriously. "When we leave, there's no going back. You sure about this?" She held her baby closer and nodded. "I have nothing to go back to." Outside, thunder rumbled again, though this time it was far away. Evan stepped out of the ship and looked up at the sky. The clouds were breaking apart, and a few stars shone brighter through the gaps. He pointed toward them. "Do you see that one?" Riala followed his finger. "The bright one? That's Lyra 7, a free world, no codes, no laws that divide." She smiled softly. "Then that's where we'll go." For a long time, they stood there side by side, two lost souls under a broken roof, making a promise to chase freedom together. Somewhere deep inside, Evan knew this. It wasn't just a rescue anymore, it was destiny. The stars above seemed to shimmer brighter, as if listening to their vow. And far away, the city's loudspeakers began to announce a new order. "Capture the human and the alien mother, alive if possible." Evan's eyes hardened as he turned back toward the ship. "Let them come," he said quietly. "They'll never stop us." And in that quiet dock, surrounded by stars and rust, the promise of a new beginning was born. The night over Zareth Prime burned with restless light. Far in the distance, the city screamed in sirens and alarms. The wanted posters of Evan Kerr and the unknown alien mother flashed across every holoscreen. The hunt had begun, and the whole colony knew their names. Down in the abandoned dock, the small cargo ship flickered with life. Evan stood near the control panel, his hands covered in oil and blood. He wiped sweat from his forehead and smiled weakly at Riala. "It's almost ready," he said, his voice low and tired. Riala looked at him with worry. "You haven't slept in 2 days." Evan shrugged. "We don't have time for sleep. Once this ship flies, we'll be free." Her baby slept in a crate lined with old blankets. Each breath the child took reminded her why she couldn't give up. She watched Evan work with quiet admiration, the way he refused to surrender. even when machines sparked and circuits failed, made him look almost unstoppable. To her, this human was not just brave, he was hope itself. Suddenly the ground shook. A low rumble filled the air, followed by a sharp metallic noise. Evan froze, eyes wide. That's not thunder. Riala's heart jumped. They found us? Before he could answer, a blast tore through the far wall of the dock. Smoke and dust filled the air as armored figures stepped through. Colonial enforcers. Target confirmed, a robotic voice echoed. Evan grabbed Riala's arm, pulling her behind the ship. Stay down, he shouted, grabbing his plasma cutter, the only tool he had that could double as a weapon. The first enforcer fired, a red beam slicing through the air, narrowly missing them. Sparks rained from the ceiling as alarms blared inside the hangar. Riala crouched behind a crate, clutching her baby tightly. Evan leaned out and fired a short blast from his cutter, hitting an enforcer's leg. The armor sizzled, but the soldier barely flinched. These weren't normal guards. They were enhanced with synthetic muscle and emotionless minds. One of them spoke coldly. "Surrender, human. You cannot win." Evan gritted his teeth. "Maybe not, but I can make it hard for you." He pressed a button on his wrist device, activating a nearby crane. The heavy arm swung across the room, smashing into one of the enforcers. Metal screamed as sparks flew everywhere. "Riala, go!" he yelled. "Get to the ship." She hesitated, tears in her eyes. "What about you?" "I'll hold them off," he shouted, firing again. Riala ran toward the ship, her bare feet slipping on the wet floor. She placed her baby in the seat and started pressing the controls just as Evan had shown her. Behind her, the sound of plasma fire echoed like thunder. She looked back and saw Evan fighting. Alone, surrounded by armored giants, every hit he took made her heart ache. But still, he stood, refusing to fall. An enforcer grabbed him by the arm and threw him against the wall. Evan groaned in pain, his vision blurring. The commander of the squad stepped forward, tall, cold, and shining in silver armor. "Why?" the commander asked in a mechanical voice. "Why risk your life for them?" Evan spat blood and smiled faintly. "Because they deserve to live. Same as you." The commander tilted his head. "Mercy is weakness." Evan's eyes burned with fury. "No, mercy is strength." He pressed the emergency trigger on his belt. A small explosion shook the hangar. The lights went out, plunging everything into smoke and shadows. He stumbled, led toward the ship, limping, coughing. "Riala," he shouted, "start the engines." She slammed her hand on the ignition. The ship roared to life, engines glowing blue and bright. Evan reached the ramp just as another blast hit the ground near him. He stumbled, but Riala grabbed his hand and pulled him inside. The hatch closed, sealing them off from the chaos outside. "Hold on!" Evan yelled as he fell into the pilot seat. He pushed the throttle forward. The ship trembled, then lifted slowly from the dock floor. Outside, the enforcers fired wildly, but the blasts only hit the metal walls. The cargo ship burst through the broken roof, rising into the storm. Rain hit the glass like bullets, but they were free. Inside, Riala cried silently. Clutching her baby close, Evan leaned back in his seat, breathing hard, his face pale from blood loss. She looked at him. "You're hurt." He smiled weakly. "Just tired." Below them, the city lights faded away, replaced by stars and endless dark. Riala turned to the window, watching the world she once feared grow smaller. "Is it really over?" she whispered. Evan smiled faintly. "Not yet." He pointed to the stars ahead. "That's where the real fight begins." Behind them, the colony's radio signals buzzed in anger. Subject Evan Kerr, an alien target, escaped containment. Order, pursue, and eliminate. But inside that small ship, there was peace. A human, an alien mother, and her child. 3 souls bound together by hope, flying toward the promise of freedom. And in that moment, under the endless stars, hope became their only weapon, and love became their rebellion. The stars stretched like diamonds across the endless dark. For the first time in days, the engines of the small cargo ship purred quietly instead of roaring in fear. The chaos of Zareth Prime was far behind now, just a fading dot of red and smoke in the distance. Inside the ship, silence ruled, broken only by the soft hum of the reactor and the faint breathing of a sleeping child. Evan sat at the pilot's seat, his hands trembling slightly. The burns on his arms still glowed faintly blue, and his face was pale, but there was peace in his eyes, the peace of someone who had done what he knew was right. Beside him, Riala watched the starlight spill through the cockpit glass, her baby resting safely in her arms. For the first time since her world had fallen apart, she wasn't afraid. She looked at Evan and spoke softly. "Are we safe now?" Evan exhaled slowly. "Safe is a big word," he said with a small smile. "But we're free. That's a start." Riala smiled faintly. her silver eyes shimmering under the soft light. She whispered, "I never thought a human would be the one to save me." Evan chuckled weakly. "Most humans wouldn't," he said, "but I'm not most humans." For a long moment they just sat there, watching the stars drift by. The universe outside looked calm, infinite, and full of promise, but the silence was broken by a sudden alarm from the console. Evan frowned, checking the radar. Several ships were approaching from behind. "They're not giving up," he muttered. "Authority cruisers. Fast ones." Riala's heart sank. "Can we outrun them?" Evan's fingers danced over the controls. "Not in a straight line, he said. "But maybe. We don't have to." He turned off the main lights, plunging the cabin into dim blue glow. The ship drifted silently now, blending with the space around them. He switched to manual flight, guiding them toward a glowing nebula ahead. "What are you doing?" Riala whispered. Evan smirked faintly, hiding inside a storm. The nebula's light grew brighter, pink, blue, and gold gases swirling like living fire. As they entered it, lightning-like energy danced across the ship's hull. The sensors flickered, and static filled the speakers. Behind them, the pursuing ships hesitated, afraid to enter the unstable field. "Hold on tight," Evan said, gripping the controls. The ship shook violently as they flew deeper into the glowing storm. Riala held her baby close, whispering softly to calm him. The lights flickered again. Then the power cut out completely. For a moment, everything was dark. Then, slowly, the stars returned. The ship floated out the other side of the nebula, silent, unseen, and safe. Evan leaned back in his seat, his body shaking from exhaustion. Riala touched his shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "We did it." Outside the window, a distant sun rose over a small blue-green planet. It shimmered with oceans and clouds, beautiful and alive. Evan pointed toward it. "That's Lyra 7, the free world." Riala's eyes filled with tears. "It's real," she whispered. He nodded. "Real. And waiting for people like us." They began their descent slowly, the ship glowing under the sunlight. From orbit, Lyra 7 looked like hope made visible. No walls, no red lights, no soldiers, just open land and sky. As they entered the atmosphere, the ship's hull warmed with orange light. Riala held her baby tightly, his small hand gripping her finger. Evan's eyes watered as the clouds parted, revealing green valleys and silver rivers below. The ship landed gently near a field covered in glowing blue flowers. When the engines finally powered down, silence filled the air. Riala stepped out first, feeling real wind for the first time in years. The air smelled of life, clean, sweet, and warm. She lifted her baby toward the rising sun and whispered, "You are home now." Evan followed her out, limping slightly but smiling. He looked at the horizon, endless, free, untouched by cruelty. Riala turned to him. "You gave us a new life." Evan shook his head softly. "No, Riala. You gave me a reason to keep living." Their eyes met, and for a moment they stood in silence under the golden sky. Somewhere far above, the news of their escape spread like wildfire. People across the colonies began whispering about the human who helped an alien mother, about a man who defied the law for compassion. His story became more than a crime. It became a legend. Children would one day hear the tale of Evan Kerr, the man who broke every rule to protect a mother and her child, the man who proved that kindness could still change the stars. Riala looked at him and smiled. "What will you do now?" He looked at the baby, then at the endless sky. "Build something better," he said softly, "for all of us." And as the sun rose higher, shining bright over a world of freedom and second chances, three shadows stood side by side, a mother, a child, and a human who refused to turn away. Their journey had begun in darkness, but now, under a new dawn beyond the stars, they finally found light.